Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Get off of Twitter. Just talk Heat all day long with us, with other Heat fans, suggest episodes, get updates before you get them anywhere else. Again, that's Off the Floor. Link is right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Football season coming up fast here. Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. They've got a new promotion. You put down $5 and play it, they give you 50. They're literally handing you a 10-to-1 bonus there. And again, you can play it right away, no strings attached. To go to prizepicks.com, the Google Play Store, or the Apple App Store. Prize Picks, and use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. I got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. We will get back to the top 40 in Heat history. We're all the way up from all the way up to 24. A lot of controversy on Greg's 24 pick. He went with Anthony Mason. I don't know if there's more controversy than my 16 pick of Tyler Hero, but we'll do the last 16. And at some point, Alex is going to jump in and just trash all of our suggestions. Anyway, I've got Alex. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. I can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. Going to take a break from those episodes just for a day. Also, upcoming episode, we're going to have the guys from 3 Yards Per Carry on, at least two of them, Chris Kaufman, CK, and Alfredo Arteaga, to talk about sort of where the two organizations, the Dolphins and the Heat, are right now. So we're going to do that over the next couple of days. That will appear on the podcast feed as well. But today we're going to talk what ifs, and we're not going to go way back, okay? Because Greg and I have spent a lot of time talking about 2000 and what happened with Zoe, where the organization would have gone, and what they would have done that season if he hadn't been diagnosed with kidney disease. But we're going to go from LeBron James's departure on. So we can't pick that one. We're not going to order these at first, but the reason we're doing this is there are a couple of things that came up over the past couple of days. One was Chris Bosh playing in Goran Dragic's farewell game, and congratulations again to Goran. And Bosh talking about what might have been if he hadn't had the blood clots, so that he couldn't be part of that team, particularly the one in 15-16. He was in the first half of the season, but not the second, and wasn't available for the playoffs. And of course, that team lost in a game 7 of the second round against Toronto. So that's one. He talked about, what would have been. Obviously, Chris might have been still playing at this stage. Honestly, like his game was going to be perfect as he got older, with the way that the NBA evolved. But the other one is Hassan Whiteside, who, by the way, has not been named in our top 24 yet, basically because I think Greg will quit the podcast if I put him in there anywhere. But he probably will find his way into the top 40 somewhere. And he was on the OG's show with Haslam and Miller, which I found kind of amusing because Haslam had to kind of babysit Whiteside while he was a member of the Heat. And he talked about how in 2000, I guess it would be 16, he was willing to take less money if KD came to the Heat, Kevin Durant. And that is an accurate recollection, actually, from what I understood, because I was talking to Whiteside's representatives at that time, and he was willing to take a little bit less, but only if KD came. And ultimately, KD didn't come. And Whiteside had max offers from at least 2 other places that I knew of: Portland and Dallas. Miami gave him the max. They gave it to him right away. Of course, that did not sit particularly well with Dwayne Wade, who they made wait while they were going through the thing with Kevin Durant. Durant ended up going to Golden State, winning a championship. Everybody says it's a fake title, whatever. And the Heat essentially brought Whiteside back and then regretted it from pretty much minute one. So that's another what if. What if Kevin Durant had come in 2016? So those are 2 good ones to start with. What do you have?
Honestly, there's that, like we were talking about it here before the show started, and there's a few options, and I thought of some more here that we didn't even discuss that I'm sure people would have gotten mad about if we didn't mention. right? And you mentioned KD, you mentioned kind of that whole thing there. I think one of the obvious ones, right? If we're just talking about post LeBron, and one of the most kind of impactful what ifs is, what if Goran and Bam don't get hurt in the finals? That's the one that comes to mind. And I know we're gonna rank these, but there's also, what if Josh Hart doesn't sweep the leg on Jimmy Butler? I think that's a pretty important one. There's also, I don't know if we're gonna do this type of stuff, but like, what if they draft Tyrese Maxey? What if they drafted, or let's say like Maxey or Desmond Bain or whoever else you want to throw in there, Jaden McDaniels, who went after Precious, right? What if they draft Devin Booker instead of Justice Winslow, right? Like those type of things. So there's a few that we can play with.
Yeah, and I think the question will be which is the most franchise altering, right? Like as we go through this list. And also we're kind of splitting these into two categories because there are the things that were in their control to a certain degree, and there were the things that were outside their control. Like I mentioned prior to the show, I know people don't want us to keep harping on this. What if Joe Cronin was not general manager of the Portland Trailblazers? If that was the case, Dame Lillard probably would be a member of the Miami Heat. We'd be looking at this entire thing differently. There's also what ifs on the positive side. Like, what if they hadn't drafted Bam Adebayo at that spot? What would the franchise look like at this stage? What if, going forward here, Eric Spoelstra had not uh, sort of been given the chance to continue to build after the Big Three and become a different kind of coach than he was during the Big Three era? I'll start here. As far as franchise altering ones that were sort of outside their control, the Bosh one is the biggest, I think. Do we agree on that? Like that's in terms of after LeBron, because they were pivoting the entire program to kind of operate through Chris. I mean, even more so than through Dwayne.
If you're just talking about that stuff, then yeah. But I do think you can, go back and forth and nitpick on whether it was more important than, the stuff that happened in the Jimmy era, just because I think they were closer to a championship in the Jimmy era than they were. Um, even though I was a big fan of those teams, 15, 16, right? That's one of my favorite Heat teams of all time. When you just look at the guys on that team and where some of them were in their careers, I thought it was a fun group of guys to watch, deep rotation, all that. That team just wasn't as good as, the Jimmy Bam teams at their best, in my opinion. And the Heat had two finals and that they just weren't able to take advantage of for different reasons. And so to me, you can go back and forth on which one, is more important and kind of sucked more. But the Bosh thing was the most like devastating for sure, in my opinion.
Well, I think the reason the Bosch thing was so devastating was because it was like another gut punch after LeBron left. So
He
I
was
feel
playing
like at
so
that
well.
point, well, he was, but I also think Heat fans were kind of talking themselves into this idea that they could be as successful as they were when LeBron was here. And I remember, a lot of stories being written at that time and how you make it work with Bosh and Wade and all the rest of this. And, if Dwayne was getting his health back, could he assume more of a role like he did prior to LeBron coming or early in LeBron's tenure? It was a little bit of sunshine pumping, I think, at the time. Like, I don't know that team would have materialized into that much, but if you look at that starting lineup, which was only 4 games over 500, I should say, the 2015-16 team before Chris went out at the All-Star break. But if you looked at the starting lineup on paper, you're like, that's pretty good. Like, I mean, you've got Dragic, you've got Hardaway. Hardaway, I'm going way back. You got Dragic, you got Dragic, you got Wade, you got Whiteside, you got Bosh, you got Deng. Now, that may not look ideal in the modern age now because you're like, wow, that team's big, actually. You got Deng playing at the 3. It was actually when Chris went out and Deng moved to the 4 that team kind of took off in the second half of the season. So it's hard to say what they would have accomplished if all of them had been together, but they had drafted Winslow and Josh Richardson, and those guys were contributing off the bench, and they did sign Joe Johnson
Yep.
as a buyout candidate, and he was really good until the playoffs, and then he was awful. But he was really good until the playoffs. So, but I think it still goes down as the number one since LeBron left because this was supposed to be the post-LeBron build. We're going to stick it to LeBron. We're going to show LeBron he made a mistake. And then, Chris goes out and it was like, okay, well, you don't really have championship aspirations. If you ever did, you don't have it then. I think there are others that Heat fans will look at, and the obvious one that Heat fans are going to go to that they'll say is it was in the organization's control, but they did not cash in, was something that I saw Jason Timpf and others have said this week, like that they missed their window in the Jimmy Butler era. But I think we need to be specific about how they missed it, right? I mean, they missed it because there's some player they could have signed or traded for that they didn't, but we've never really identified what that was. Bradley Beal, I mean, that would have been a horrible what if, like if they had actually done that. It comes back to Dame again, but then with Dame, like we're saying, some of that was out of their control. I don't know that any of the other moves they've talked about over the past couple of years, or the fans have talked about, would have materially changed the trajectory of the Jimmy era. Do you identify? Well, that's it. But like, okay, was he really available to you at the time? Right.
Yeah, I think him and Donovan are in that category for me too. That summer, even though I think, like as you have talked about ever since, that KD was the priority, so it wasn't the same. Like you can't categorize them exactly the same. It's not apples to apples, but that both of those guys, that it was going on that summer.
Yeah, I know, and that's fair. I remember us discussing both of them. But even, I mean, if you remember, KD first he wanted to be traded, then he didn't want to be traded. Then ultimately, Phoenix gets new ownership, and they're willing to trade Bridges, who they were not willing to trade before, and the trade ends up going down. Now, it always felt to me, and I know Le Batard and others have reported differently on this, but it always felt to me like it was closer in 2016, which Whiteside kind of said on the OG's show, like that it was reasonably close. Like they thought they had a chance. It was a dark horse situation at first, but then Spo made this presentation to Durant. There was a lot of good buzz about everything that was going on there.
Boston was in the mix too that year, if I remember correctly.
They were. In the meantime, Dwayne was overseas steaming because they didn't take care of him. I mean, there are some other what ifs that work the other direction. Like, what if Dwayne's never traded back to Miami? Jimmy's probably never in Miami. We never have any of these other conversations.
What if Dwayne signs in 2016 and you give him the extra whatever it was or I don't remember if they had offered everything they could at the moment. You probably remember that better than me. But what if
they could have gone way over with the bird rights. And if he had waited, like they asked him to wait, basically, but he wasn't going to wait for that. I don't know where the franchise would have been. People would say, well, they didn't win a title anyway, so it didn't end up working out. But they probably rebounded quicker by not giving Dwayne that contract than if they had given Dwayne that contract. And then they ended up bringing Dwayne back on essentially a minimum afterwards, which he way outplayed.
Maybe you don't get Bam
for the vibes. If you're too good, you don't get Bam.
That's
right?
what I'm saying. I mean, even though like maybe you could make the case that Bam could have been had if you were a few picks later, but if you're just saying like that pick where he was taken at, or like in that range, you probably don't get him.
But here's the other one. What if in the 16-17 season, when they're 11-30, they do tank?
I was going to say if they make the playoffs in that season.
We can get to that too, but let's start here. What if they do tank? Okay,
we're gonna get to like Marvel multiverse stuff here.
Well, which was kind of a consideration at that point. Like they were thinking about they wouldn't use the word tank, but they were thinking about kind of repositioning their priorities maybe a little bit in the last half of that season. And then you had what do you call it? They won like 2 or 3 straight games, and it was like, okay, wait, let's hold off on this.
Yep.
And if they do tank, they don't get Bam because they would have picked a lot higher. I don't think they would have picked Bam at 5, 6, 7 if they ended up all the way up there in the lottery. I mean, at one point, I remember looking at it, they were like 2. Like they were like the second worst team in the league at one stage.
They end up with like Josh Jackson or something instead of Bam because they tanked that year. He'll never tank
like
again.
That's the other way to look at it. But here on this note, you made the point, like what if they made the playoffs? Then they would have probably placed themselves out of the range of getting Bam, and they probably would have made the playoffs. So this is another what if. What if Dion Waiters doesn't turn his ankle with 2 weeks left in that regular season? Because if he doesn't, they probably another guy who hasn't shown up right now on our. Greg should have more reservations about that Anthony Mason at 24. I kind of feel like Dion Waiters had a more impactful season if we're talking about short stints with the Heat than Mace did, even while making an All-Star team. But anyway, he turned an ankle, and so they ended up losing a couple games late in the season, and they ended up missing the playoffs by 1 game. So that's another one that you can look at. So All of these. Now we'll try to narrow some of these down on the other side. I know that we've missed some, but I do want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm sure she'll have some. Lynette, insurancebylynette.com. Car insurance, renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance. She can handle all of it for you in her office in Lauderhill, but services the entire Tri-County area. Reach out to her at 954-581-8800. That's 954-581-8800. Insurancebylynette.com, the insurance agency that works for you. All right, what have we missed? What are some other ones here? Now, okay, there's some during the Jimmy era that are on the court, right? What if the officials don't go back and reverse Max Strus's 3? Right?
Oh,
What does that
man.
look like?
Yeah, that's a great one actually right there. That one was gutting, man. That one just like it was just so weird because I remember like us being in the arena. I know we weren't, me and Brady, like during those years that we didn't get to sit with you during the big games. We got sent to the 300s, and
It's probably better because I would have. I don't know about the cheering at the table, but that's you guys don't do a lot of that.
What cheering? What
You
do
guys don't. You guys don't do a
about?
lot of. You guys don't. But there might have been some emotion. It's all right. There are longtime Heat beat writers who do a little, banging on the table when certain things
No
happen.
names here.
Yeah, no names here. So there's that. There's also what if Jimmy takes a 2 against Boston?
Yeah, what if he tries to like Hezzy, Al Horford into coming up to him so he can drive by him? Maybe Jaylen Brown recovers and he has to pass it out to a wide open Victor Oladipo. I mean, that's a very different. Like, who knows what happens there? If Jimmy can get to the rack before Brown recovers, if he does have to pass it to Victor, and Victor was good at that time. He was playing well for the Heat, but there's so many, man. And we also didn't mention like, what if they sign Hayward in 17?
Well, that would have been a disaster. But then Hayward maybe doesn't get hurt because again,
no Kyrie to overthrow the lob.
Right, maybe he doesn't get hurt. That's another one. What if? What if? Well, I was going through a bunch of these, but what if Dragic doesn't get hurt? You mentioned that one. That's a big one in 2020. Dragic and Bam. I mean, we could also say, what if there's no COVID? The Heat were kind of trending towards like dropping out of the playoff chase entirely that year, right? Like people forget that they were struggling. They got blown out by Charlotte. Remember that last game before they cleared everybody out, and the ushers were like, "We'll see you in 2 years."
I didn't go to
just walked in. I'm not talking about basketball right now. Oh no, that was that. I'll always remember that one. And they were not playing well going into the COVID break, and it's like everything changed
and
when they came out. No, he was not. He needed the rest actually, and then he came back playing at a very high level. I mean, there's other smaller ones. Like, what if they re-signed PJ Tucker over Caleb Martin, which they didn't do. They stuck with Caleb at that point. What if they don't sign Hero to that extension?
That one is not top 5 material for me.
No,
it's down. I mean, like I think it's a good one to throw in here, just talking about it. But I just feel like they almost had to. You know what I mean? Like that's just the market that was there for him. And it just would have been like, okay, what do you just make him wait a couple of years? Like I don't know that was possible. I mean, who knows?
What if
right?
they don't? What if they don't listen to Jimmy and trade for Kyle and give him the 3rd year?
Then they probably go after like who the other point guards that were out there that summer was like. It was like Sexton, Dinwiddie, Lonzo before he got hurt. Probably one of those guys. I mean, there's actually there's more stuff in here than I thought originally, for sure.
Well, there's always going to be other things that could have happened. I just think none of these things are necessarily above what the Bosh thing did psychologically. I mean, because if you really look at it, they had that run, the 30-11 run in the second half of 16-17. But then they kind of had, what was it, 2 years in there that were basically just Dwayne coming back and then the celebration of Dwayne, right? I mean, that's all we remember from those seasons. There's really not a whole lot else. And then 1920, you get into the bubble, and they've maximized a lot of their opportunities on the court in the past 5 years. I mean, I know that the fans don't want to hear that, but they've made it to 3 conference finals and 2 finals. I don't really have a what if. I know we can talk about what if Josh Hart doesn't step on Jimmy's or, doesn't injure Jimmy. Okay.
Sweep the leg. I
mean, what that would have looked like. But do you believe that Jimmy would, even if he was healthy, would have gotten to the finish line playing at
I
a
don't
high
know.
enough level to beat that Denver team? I don't know, right?
I don't know either, and I think we can get into a healthy conversation about that because it was obvious, like when it was happening. I mean, even though like there was hope after game 2 for sure, like
Mm-hmm.
all hope wasn't lost then, but as it was happening, it was I remember like so much of how I felt and the way that we were talking about it was like trying to find solutions, and it's like there's no solution. They just have too many
No,
counters, too many, too much versatility and ways that they can just devastate you. A comfortable 5-man lineup that they can go to and guys they can swap out. Now a couple of those guys aren't there anymore. But at the time, it was like
right.
they were hitting on all cylinders. And so I don't know if Jimmy gets them past the finish line, but I do know that the level that he was playing at, it's a lot more competitive. And just the fact that, again, not to the same degree, but they've had 2 finals, kind of sidetracked because of injuries. Like it's just, unfortunate. It's hard for me to not have those, like, if not top 3, top 5 to me, because like that we've named so many, but just
Mhm,
without even like ranking it, to me, my 5 easily comes down to Bosh, comes down
mhm,
to Goran and Bam in 2020, Jimmy
mm.
a year ago getting injured and not playing at a top 3 player level anymore, and what that did to their run.
What about
Like that
Durant not coming either of
Durant
those
not
2 times,
coming
right?
100% in there, and then the last one would probably be Dame.
Yeah.
But then you could also throw like D Wade leaving in 2016 as like an honorable mention because that was pretty damn impactful. It
Well, it
just
was
didn't. I
impactful
don't think they were going to win a
psycho
championship.
well, that's the thing. It was impactful from a psychological standpoint for the organization and kind of the way that it does business, because I do think it changed the way that Riley does business in some ways, that there's been more of a sentimentality since, because of the recognition of the mistakes that were made during that process, not just in 16, but also in 15 and in 14, to be honest. And so ever since then, like, you look at the next year where they overpaid waiters, they overpaid James Johnson. They brought in Olynyk at what was a pretty healthy price at the time. Not a bad contract, but again, pretty healthy price at the time. Whiteside had already signed. Tyler Johnson had already been re-signed. So this happened kind of the Whiteside happened before Dwayne left. Tyler Johnson was kind of a reaction during the period of time that Dwayne left. But it did change the way that they do business, at least I think until recently, where they have been willing to sort of let guys go, and not be quite as sentimental. They did it with Struess without really even offering him anything because they really couldn't. And they did it with Gabe to a certain degree in the way they handled that negotiation. They did not with Caleb.
Yeah,
They did not with Caleb, but Caleb's agent may have saved them in that. But I do think that it changed them. It changed the way that they do business a little bit. Now, one of the things that Greg and I have talked about is whether it's still winning or misery for Pat. And I know a lot of fans don't think it is, that it's not quite that dichotomy. If it's not, I think some of it is the natural course of aging and you become a little bit more sentimental as you age. And I think that's part of it. But I think part of it is the Dwayne situation going back to 16, that I think it's more about relationships for him at this point. I'm not saying he doesn't want to win big. He does. Otherwise, he wouldn't be sticking around. But it feels more human than it did earlier on, where it was kind of, I keep talking about Cutthroat Pat. I don't think Cutthroat Pat's coming back. Like, his comments to Jimmy are the closest that he's
man.
gone. I know you're giving me the side eye there. I no,
I
I
don't
see
know.
why you're doing that. Well, it came back a little bit in that presser, and I know you and Brady were like, huh,
I
and
was
I'm
in
like, wait,
awe. I
that's the
was
guy.
in awe.
I'm like, that's the guy I covered for years. Like, seriously, like outside
Yeah.
locker rooms in Detroit, like that's Cutthroat Pat. That's I haven't seen that guy in a long time. So
No, that
we'll
was
see if
like watching
business
like
has
when
changed
D
the other way.
Wade. That was like watching when D Wade, like in those last couple of seasons, would have like a crazy game, like every once in a
You're
while. It's
like,
like, oh, vintage, vintage.
vintage, and he hated that word vintage. I mean, but yeah, sometimes you would see it and be like, wait a second, that Dwayne still. I still can't believe Dwayne had a triple double in his second. That's just amazing. Like, I mean, and the pass to Haslam to seal it. There were great moments there. All right, so I'm kind
Oh,
of with you on the 5. Go ahead.
I've got another honorable mention here. What
Yeah,
if, what if they found a way to get D Wade into their ownership situation and didn't let him walk to Utah?
that's a good one. That's a good one. And now he's going to
Maybe
be
not top
broadcasting their
five.
games on NBC. He's going to be broadcasting their games on NBC, except they don't really have their games on national television, very much at this point. But yeah, that's another one. I do think for the outside players, it really is about the Durant thing. But again, I don't know that there was ever a clear path to get him. they had some long shot situations and they dipped their toes into it, and it hasn't happened to this point. But again, I don't. It's tough to put that as a what if because it was always a long shot in any of the years we're talking about. But that would have changed the course. Like even Whiteside said, that's not very often. I agree with something Hassan says, but he said like that this would have been the next sort of iteration of this team um, in terms of post LeBron. Now, I'll say this: I don't think Whiteside and Durant would have worked together at all. By the way, you
Oh
think
man.
so?
I mean,
Hassan
Whiteside's
wanted
like
with where Hassan wanted the ball all the time, and they had to play through him, and it just Bam and Durant's a
eh,
different story. I
I don't. I disagree. I'm not gonna lie, because I think at that point you would have had so much talent that it's like he gets kind of forced into the role that he had
You're not
started
forcing
before.
him into any role. No, but that's the thing. Like they try the best that I saw Hassan look ever, as far as the team concept, okay, was when they put him on the bench behind Stoudemire. Remember that? Amari
Yep.
was pretty much cooked at that point, okay? But they started Amari to place hold, and then Whiteside would just come off the bench, and it was like, I think he was so pissed he wasn't starting that actually instead of moping, he channeled it into this rage when he got onto the court. And I remember covering a game in Dallas, he just went crazy, like when he came in. That's the one time I saw it. But I just think he believed, like literally, that he was Kareem. Like you had to throw the ball down into him every single time.
I don't.
I don't know how
But if
that
you
would have
would have
worked with
had
Durant.
like if you would have had D Wade and KD and on top of Goron, who's already there, of course, and
Mm.
again, like if we're doing a what if scenario where Bosh is okay, and this, like, I really don't think
Right.
it would have been that big of an issue. Like, I think
Bosh and Whiteside did not work though.
no,
Go
I
back
know,
and
I
look.
know.
Go back and look at the numbers. And here's the other thing: if you had to put Goran out there with Whiteside for too much longer in that scenario, first thing Goran would have fed Dragic because would have fed Durant because I've never seen Goran's the nicest guy in the world, but the frustration level of Goran when he would explain to you why Whiteside did not know how to set a screen, like it was just it's always diagonal. It's just he would have driven him nuts. I don't think that team. I don't think that team would have really got. I mean, again, you
Oh
put
man,
KD on any
you think
team, but
you were
I don't
talking
know.
the other day about how and you've been
Uh,
talking about it since 2016, like that you thought that team could really compete if they were healthy with the Cavs. If you add KD to that team, you don't think they can compete with the Cavs because there was like
well,
nobody else in the East at that
but it would
point.
have been KD instead of Dwayne, right?
No, didn't Dwayne, like, wasn't it supposed to be together? I don't
I
man.
don't
I
know
don't
if that's
remember
the
the
way
Pat
Whiteside
McAfee.
perceived it, but I don't think that's something they could have done. But I'll have to look back at
Mm.
it. But I know that ultimately they offered Dwayne more money than Chicago did. If you took the taxes into consideration, and he was so pissed about them and the way they'd handled it, particularly Pat and going for Whiteside first and then waiting on Durant, which he viewed, I can tell you, when we were talking during that time, he's like, that's a pipe dream. KD's never coming. I think he was actually closer to coming than Dwayne wanted to acknowledge at the time,
Mm.
based on the reports that we were getting and some of the stuff that came out. But
Like
Dwayne was like, he's not coming here.
the Dwayne thing also, like, if you would have just had him on your side, right, and not tried to
Mm.
lowball him for being like, "Oh, well, if you look at the taxes and all that stuff," like, you could have had him on your side when you're trying to recruit, KD, had him alongside Spo and whoever else was in that room trying to recruit him.
But I
Like,
don't even think it was the low balling with him. It was the waiting. It was he didn't like waiting, and it was they were over. And I
fair.
can tell you that Gabrielle was angrier than Dwayne was about it. And you know that when you have a woman in your ear who's telling you all the time that you're getting screwed by the company, you know how that
I
works.
just like Dwayne, like if you're Dwayne Wade, if you try to like get into his head, like you would probably feel the same too. It's like,
I agree. I was on Dwayne's side. I
no,
know.
yeah, I
I know.
remember.
That's why. That's why and that's why when we did an episode of not episode when I was hosting on 790, Dan came on the show because we did about. I wish I could find that segment because I was Dwayne and he was Pat.
That
Basically,
was classic.
and I can tell you that Dwayne was listening to the entire thing from a hotel room in New York. Anyway, good times.
Like a mock
Thanks, Alex.
negotiation.
It was. I mean, what if Dan and I had actually hashed it out there on the air, but we did not. There we go. All right. Thanks to Alex. Lots of what ifs. I'm with you on the majority. The biggest one to me, though, is still I would have liked to see Chris Bosh continue his career just for a lot of reasons. I don't think they would have won a title. I don't.
What if they
With
brought
him as
Michael
like
Beasley
the
back
best
one
player.
more time?
All right, time to go.